My name is Craig Register, and I am one of the several people that have worked to put this series together. Tonight is the first of 7 sessions that we'll have over the next 2+ months. And it's my job just to say a couple brief things by way of a general introduction, and then to turn it over to my wonderful colleague Rose Gorman and this great group of educators and activists and just brilliant people that we're going to hear from tonight. Detroiters Speak is our community classroom. When I say our, I mean it's all of ours, whoever shows up. It's our classroom each time we gather, and it's a project that's emerged from a program called Semester in Detroit, which you might see the sweatshirt I'm wearing. Semester in Detroit is a U of M program that has had students living, interning, taking classes in, with, and about Detroit, with Detroiters, participating in multiple different ways with the city for the last 16 years. Detroiters Speak, really the sort of heart and soul of this community classroom is in the name. Everybody in this room right now may not consider themselves a Detroiter. We're not all Detroiters here tonight. Many of us are Detroiters. The series over the years is focused on, and you can't see it right now, but over to your left, we've had about 13 or 14 different sessions of Detroiters Speak over the last dozen years. And we really mean it when we say Detroiters Speak. We center, and we want to center throughout our conversations, the lives and perspectives, wisdom, experiences of Detroiters. And we can define Detroiter in different ways. We mean people who've been here for a while, people who are from this place, people who have been working and living and breathing and being active in the many different diverse communities of this huge city over the decades. And so, of course, everybody is a part of this classroom, and we call this our community classroom. We're all teachers, we're all students. These are cliches, yes, but they're really something we take to heart. No matter how many degrees you do or don't have, no matter how many years you have or haven't been in school, official school, traditional school, no matter where you have or haven't traveled, no matter how many books you have or haven't read, we're students and teachers in this space. And it's wonderful that we're here in the Bog School, because I know that this is heart and soul, a part of the philosophy of the Bog School as well, that we are always learning from and with each other, no matter how old or young or in between we might be. And so I hope you feel welcome in this space. I'm really happy to just point out a couple people quickly. This series this semester has been sponsored and organized by a few different really important folks. Julia, who you'll be hearing from the Bog School, is an anchor partner this semester. 482 Forward. We don't have folks from 482 Forward here tonight, but they are a big part of this series, and we're going to be joining with them later this semester. Rack It Up Detroit, our friends Holland and Freed, who just walked in, are also anchor partners in helping to plan this series. Barry Fishman over here, a colleague of mine at U of M who's been building the LEAPS program at Marygrove for the last, decade. Started in the last year with some students, some of whom are sitting up front here, learning for equity, action, and problem solving. U of M LEAPS program. I actually remembered it. Wow. Look it up. It's a new program at Marygrove that the School of Ed is putting together. And so lastly, I'll say our program in this series does have the support of the Office of the Provost. It's not the only reason we're recording. Hi, Provost. But we do have to, acknowledge our sponsors. And I do want to just lastly say that we're grateful that tonight's food is being served by, and I should say was prepared by, the Detroit People's Food Co-op. And so you may have heard me give them a plug earlier if you didn't know that the food was from the Detroit People's Food Co-op, of which many people in this room I know were a part of helping build. Certainly Bob and Malik Bikini, who we're going to learn from, was central among many in getting it off the ground and helping it live in its space on Woodward. So we're grateful to them for the food tonight. And so thank you again for being here. I look forward to tonight's discussion and the whole series. I hope you'll come back. If you didn't sign in on your way out, please sign in. And I probably forgot something, but I'm going to hand it over to Rose Gorman, and we're going to learn together about education, justice in Detroit, and really almost anywhere. So thank you so much.
Okay, so I think just so everyone knows, we're about a business. And we're going to try to pass the mic around. But before we dive in, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I feel like there's a lot of nerves leading up to the first public session, and it's finally here. So thank you for being here with us. I just want to give our host, Principal Julia Putnam, some space to welcome us to the Bog School, and also kind of talk to us a little bit about tonight. Craig spoke a little bit about our planning process with the series this year, and each organization that he spoke of will be leading 2 sessions this semester, and the first 2 came from lots of conversations led by Principal Putnam. So, Julia, can you say a few words about tonight?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bog School. We're the host, and you all have moms. So I'm sorry about the wonky thing, in case it makes your head go like that. And other than that, I hope that you're comfortable. The James and Grace Lee Bog School has been in operation since 2013. This is the 4th year that we've been in this particular building. The school is named after James and Grace Lee Boggs. There's a picture of them up there on the piano. And they were longtime social justice activists that inspired the work of myself and the fellow educators, Amanda Rossman, who's one of my co-founders, and Mommy Soul Teachwork, who were inspired by Jimmy and Grace's idea that you learn through building community. And when I was asked to be part of the team to participate in this year's series, one of the things, the theme was rethinking education justice, and it got us thinking about the mission and the purpose of the Bog School. And ours is to nurture creative, critical thinkers who contribute to the well-being of their communities. And one of the things that we asked ourselves when we were planning the school is, what will kids know when they're done with us, and who will they be as a result of being with us all this time in school? And so the discussion became this kind of discussion about curriculum came through the acknowledgement that we are living in a changing world, a rapidly changing world. And what do our kids need to know to navigate it? And what do our kids need to know to be creative? What do they need to learn to think critically? And what do they need to know to contribute to the well-being of their communities? So we know lots of creative, critical thinkers who are not contributing to the well-being of our communities. They forget that third part. And so what is liberatory learning? And who decides what our kids know? Who decides what our kids need to know? And how do we expand that? And so that's what we're here to talk about tonight. So I want to thank my fellow panelists who are here and will introduce themselves. But I cannot think of better people to be having this conversation with tonight. So very excited to be here. And thank you all for being here, including Bog staff who are here like way after their bedtimes. Because they contribute a lot to this discussion as well.
Thank you. And I also just wanted to, since we have the course page up, definitely feel free to peruse this every now and then, especially if you're not able to make every session. This series, we'll be putting suggested readings, hopefully session recordings up so you can kind of relive it if you want to. While we're looking at this, over to the left, you'll see our archive, and you'll notice that Semester in Detroit has discussed education in the past in Detroit or Speak back in 2017. So maybe you want to check that out too. And maybe you'll check out Principal Putnam's article that is listed as some suggested reading for college. I can't help it. I can't help it. I'm country. So let's get back in the present now. Okay, we're gonna introduce the rest of our panelists. So I'm gonna start directly to my left. I've just been soaking up all your wisdom beforehand. Keisha Gray is the founder of Our Children Count and is an educational abolitionist and community connector. And then, of course, you know Principal Julia Putnam. She's the principal and co-founder of the Vox School. We also have Michelle Fecto. Did I say that right? Oh, I did, okay. Michelle is the director of the Center for Labor and Community Studies at the University of Michigan Dearborn campus. And she's also a former member of the State Board of Education. And then finally, we have Malika Keeney, Detroit People's Food Co-op, but also educator, activist, and founder of the Insaroma Institute. Did I say that correctly? Well, I would love it if you could say it as well, just so for future reference.
That's close.
Okay. Clearly, I'm a lost cause. So, we're gonna kick things off. Our central question here tonight is to talk about what we're teaching our kids in Detroit and why Detroit and beyond. But before we do that, I kind of want to have our panelists introduce themselves aside from their title, because they're bringing a lot of different perspectives into the room. So let's kind of hear what perspectives they're bringing into the room.
We'll come back to you. I think aside from my title as principal and co-founder of a school, I'm also the product of a single mom who raised me in Detroit and in Detroit public schools. And I think it's important to know that because in the schools that I grew up in, there were two messages, and one was that my mom was kind of a loser, and the schools knew what I needed more than she knew what I needed. Even though I and my siblings and she knew that that was not true. And also the message that I got from school was that success meant getting out of Detroit. Like, do whatever you need to do to make sure that you do not have to live in this city when you grow up, because if you don't, then you're the loser who got left here and not the successful person who got out. And that is also a message that I rejected. And I think that was a good message to reject. And so part of the starting the Vox School was thinking about how to redefine success for kids growing up in Detroit.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle Fecto and I am a mother from Detroit. I have raised with my husband Eddie, right there. We parented 19 children, many of them with severe disabilities. And we have had many long, a lot of issues with the schools and a lot of wonderful schools that have supported our kids, that took my son with autism, that helped my son who has deaf, hard of hearing, went out of their way, and these are traditional public schools. So I have had, it wasn't all nirvana, but there's a lot of battles, but my experience has been that when other schools would not take my kids with disabilities, the traditional publics did, and I am grateful for that. So I ran for the State Board of Ed because of all the mess that was going on and with all the takeovers of the schools in Detroit, the high stakes standardized testings, just this whole mess that was pushed on public schools, the privatization of public schools, the EAA and all that mess. So that was something that I came in as a warrior. I'm a union organizer by trade, a union rep by trade. I've worked in labor movement for 40 years. And so I used those skills to try to organize and bring people together to fight against the things that I thought were detrimental. So I'm elected, I don't know if there's anything. Did I forget anything?
You're wonderful.
Okay. So that's me.
That might be as far as it goes. You might have to-
What up, though?
What up?
What those who speak that language. Good evening, everybody else. So I'm also a product of Detroit Public Schools. I went there from from first grade through 12th grade. And I had the fortune of growing up in the 1960s and early 1970s and having some teachers at a school called Post Junior High School, back when they had junior high school before they had middle schools, who radicalized me and my classmates who played Malcolm X records for us and had us read Black Panther newspapers and set me on a course that I never deviated from. And so I decided maybe I'll be a teacher and try to create some revolutionaries too. And so I'm a co-founder of Insortiment Institute, which functioned from 1989 until 2013. And I'm currently involved in some efforts to re-implement African-centered education in Detroit Public Schools.
Back to me. I'm Keita Gray, and I've been a Detroiter for the last 30 years. I was born and raised in Toronto, and at about the age of 7, I came home and told my mom that I was interested in being white. And so my mother decided that it was a good idea to ship me back to where my family's from, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That decision to send me home to community was a defining factor for me, and it shifted the way I saw the world, it shifted the way I saw myself, and it really had me rethink education even as a young person. I saw myself reflected in every facet of daily life when I was growing up there. So I lived there for about 4 years and came back home, and I became a problem to the school systems from then on out. I have 2 young people now that I try to raise to be critical thinkers about what they learn, how they learn, and to be free thinkers. And even as an educator myself, I try to make sure that shows up in the work that I do. So that's me.
I just want to know y'all as people now. Y'all are just fascinating. So I guess I kept asking if folks had a first question and they wanted us to start with to kind of enter into this conversation. And you know, when we were meeting about tonight, the word messy came up when it came to curriculum building and just that whole process and what's taught in schools. And messy is a word to unpack. So maybe we can start with that. Maybe start with a little bit of background, and then we can unpack the word messy. Michelle, did you have some slides you wanted to?
Yeah, I'm not gonna go through all of them, I have 12, I'm gonna kind of run over some, but could you, I have my assistant helping me. Okay, so, yeah. So you can go past that one, that's just me. So in the state constitution, it has different things about education, and that's one of the links that Craig sent to you. I put this in because this is the first one, and I think this is important because it says that it's the encouragement of education. And that's a problem, because if you wanted to sue the state, it doesn't say your child is entitled to a great education or an equitable education or fair, or, you know, it's a very low bar. And so there's been times when in the city of Detroit, there's been lawsuits around literacy, that the state had to do different things, and this is a problem. And I've been really a strong advocate for changing the language. Other states have stronger language that give people some guarantee to make improvements or to have the state take accountability. Even when the state took over Detroit, they weren't being held accountable. Like in Highland Park, they took over Highland Park, and the whole thing went to pot, and then, you know, people looked at suing the state because they were in charge, and then it was like, no, we just have to encourage education if you want to do anything. But anyway, so let me move on, sorry. I can go down this rabbit hole. Next slide. So this is where it talks about the State Board of Ed. It's an 8-board, like U of M, Michigan State, Wayne State, and the State Board of Ed are all kind of made the same. They have a governing body of 8 people that are statewide elected. And the State Board of Ed is similar. We have 8-year terms, which I didn't know when I first started. But, made a commitment for 8 years. And staggering, so it changes every 2 years. And right now, they're dominated by Democrats, but whatever. And we are to have oversight. And it says like we're supposed to have this leadership, but we don't control the budget, which is a problem. So the legislature, the governor, matter of fact, the governor just put in her budget that she wants the top to bottom, again, with the bottom 5% have to publicize to the parents that they're poor performing. I mean, it's this whole thing where, anyway, the governor and the state legislature have a lot of influence over education. You can go to the next one. I just kind of covered that. But the board we do not write curriculum. The board comes up with standards. And I was involved with the social studies standards. And that was a trip. It took almost 3 years because it was so contentious. Now math and science are less contentious. Social studies, very contentious. Because what makes it messy is everybody has skin in the game. Everybody pays taxes. Those taxes are used for the schools. Businesses want employees who are, career ready. Colleges want students who are ready to go to college, not have to take, prep classes. A lot of people want people who are good citizens that are able to think critically and understand. So civics is one of the requirements. But the board does not set, or even the Department of Education, which reports to the board, does not set curriculum. That is empowered in the districts and in the schools. Local school boards, elected school boards, or with charters selected school boards, they have a say over the curriculum, the books, and things like that. So now there's a lot of leeway. They can give teachers more influence if they want. And teachers certainly have a lot of leeway in the classroom to come up with and meet the standards. But the bottom line is nobody's really checking. So there's a lot of freedom, and especially K-8. It's when you get to high school that the demands become a lot more. So there's a lot of latitude, except for these standardized tests, which is a whole other ball of wax. Okay. So a little bit of history. I just think this is important. This is a guy in Texas had 5 children. He sued the federal government and saying that his kids weren't educated because the way that Texas did it, they could use property taxes, and he lived in a poor community. So he didn't have any money to have a decent school. So he was saying that under the federal law, he's entitled to he sued Texas, or he was suing Texas in federal court to say that their system was not equitable and fair. And what the US Supreme Court said in a 5-4 decision is they have no obligation on education. They don't have any right, you don't have a right to sue the federal government if you don't like the way education's going down. Then later in '83, A Nation at Risk report came out. And this was under Reagan, and it caused this whole hullabaloo about how terrible public schools were. And soon after, we started to hear more failing schools, failing schools, failing schools. All of a sudden, and especially after like the 1990s, the term failing schools was showing up in all kinds of reports and in the media, and they were really lambasting public education for many reasons, from the left, from the right, from the other. So there was, because of this failing school, because people are paying a bunch of taxes, they want accountability. That's the test. And then what are they going to test on? And there were also people that were making a lot of money by privatization, that the hedge fund managers and stuff like that. So there's a lot of people with interests and skin and concerns, which makes it all very messy. But that Nation at Risk report is sort of like the beginning of this new phase of how terrible public education is. You can switch, okay. Proposal A, which passed in Michigan, was it changed the funding. They got rid of all the property taxes, which is what they used for schools. So poor districts were, would have less than Bloomfield Hills. And there was Kalkaska was a district that actually closed before the school year was over because they didn't have enough money to make it to the end of the year. So then I think people were afraid about being sued, You know, the state, people are gonna sue the state. Anyway, they passed this proposal, they got rid of the property taxes as the sole mean for schools, they come up with sales taxes. But the thing is, the money went to the state, it didn't stay locally. So once the money goes to the state, they have some control over like what they're gonna ask you to do to get that money, right? So that is where, you know, what you're gonna teach, how you're gonna teach, that's all part of the mix. So, and that also opened up for privatization too. Prop A called for having more private ed schools. When I say privatized, I mean charter schools. 2002, Bush came in with this No Child Left Behind. It was a bipartisan bill, and it called for a lot of standardized testing and accountability. And it was like, we're helping, you know, these poor kids who don't have a good education, and we're gonna do it through testing and making sure they're not left behind. But it didn't, to me, it backfired. It never made things better, it just made people focus on testing. And then math and reading was the thing. So all of a sudden, everybody became focused on math and reading, other things, social studies, things like that kind of became lesser. Special education was meaningless. I mean, nobody cared if that was good or bad. So and then in 2006, we had the merit curriculum, and that's where, and we have these, this is where the state legislated, it wasn't the board, the state legislated that you had to have certain classes. And I have handouts that you can have on it. Basically, 4 credits, a credit is a year. So 4 credits of math, 4 credits of English. They have to have an online learning experience. They just got a new personal finance that's coming up now. But, you know, 3 credits of science and social studies and that kind of stuff. So they came up with these broad topics. You take 22 credits to graduate high school, 18 credits are prescribed, that they have to be these certain subject areas. But the state does not say the curriculum, they just gave these broad standards of what you have to teach. So that became law in 2006. Right when you can flip to the next one.
So maybe just a couple more minutes and we'll
Okay,
do that.
I'm sorry, I kind
We'll put that on the website too.
of, yeah, it's on the website. We have Race to the Top with Obama, and that's where things really went berserk. I had the pleasure of meeting Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, and told him exactly what I thought of him at a conference at the Department of Ed. But anyway, that's where they gave these punitive things, a data-driven, high-stakes testing. He was gunning for Detroit, wanted it all to, basically, if you're in the bottom 5%, you had the choice of closing your school and turning into a charter, or firing all the teachers, or firing the principal and half of the teachers, or going through a remodel thing. It became this incredibly punitive process and what correlates to the test scores is poverty. That's the number one thing. Even the Mackinac Center, which is a conservative group, they came up and said, well, it really correlates with you. The poorer you are, the lower the test scores. Well, because poverty is the issue. Poverty is the issue. And we got to start tackling poverty. So, I think then, all right, yeah. So there was a rollback in 2015 with all that testing. There was a lot of people organizing to push back on all this high-stakes testing. And finally, the Department of Ed is bipartisan. They realized all this mess was not working. A lot of people were against the Common Core, which was part of what the Obama administration was trying to do. And with Bill Gates and all that craziness. And so they rolled it back and they left it, now it's left up to the states. So they don't have these punitive things. So, but there's not this, you're gonna close your school, we're gonna fire all the teachers. We've gotten all kinds of things back for education under Whitmer with teachers can now, that are organized, have their rights back to collectively bargain and things like that, which was also part of the process. They were attacking tenure and making it easier to fire teachers under the stuff under Obama. And I voted for Obama, I love Obama, but his education process stuff was terrible, just terrible. So if you want to get involved, there's a couple of ways that you can. You can run for the State Board of Ed if you want. It's 8 years though, remember that? Like when they come up with, well, this is how they come up with the standards. The department pulls together content experts, people, university professors, people who've taught for a long time, teachers, just experts in the content area. And they come up with a draft, they bring it to the state board to review, they show it to the board. In a meeting, people can give comment, public comment. If you come to the meeting, you can give public comment on it as well. You could also, if you wanted to, there's elected people on the board, and Marshall Bullock is a great guy from Detroit. He was a former educator and a community organizer. He's on there. You could just contact him and say you want to talk about whatever it is you want in the schools to do, or the state board to do. Then the draft goes out to public comment. Every superintendent or acting superintendent in charter schools receives an invitation to these public comment sessions. And they're also in the free press and newspapers, different outlets. And they go around the state, and you can give public comment about the draft standards. Then it comes back after all the comments, and the board can look at all the comments, and then we have a discussion, and then we finalize, and ends up with a vote. So, and when the social studies ones went around, the department, somebody in the department decided to give, like, this guy named Patrick Colbeck, who is nuts. He took the word democracy out of all of the social studies standards. He didn't want us to say democracy, he wanted us to say constitutional republic. So we had to have the board go, the board demanded that we have another round of public speaking and as a way to push back, and then he didn't get to say anything anymore. But he was threatening to withhold money if we didn't do what he wanted to do. Yeah.
I think we can, Michelle, we can
Yeah.
probably share the rest of them on the.
Yeah, and then all the takeovers and everything else, so that's why it's messy. That's why it's messy.
I don't envy you having to stuff all that on a handful of slides. That's a lot of bullets and whatnot. But just kind of thinking about some of the movement and the programs and all of these developments presented on the slides, I'm curious about what that actually looks like on the ground. Like, what does that look like for everyone at this table? I'll just let the panelists kind of take it, but what did that look like in the classrooms? Whether you were in the classroom as a student at the time or having some of your own littles in the classroom, what did all of this look like in real life?
I think it's just interesting to see policy laid out like that. I tend to try to look at things like when we talk about failing schools and failing systems, I'm always thinking about the human element of that. Like, who is the human in that experience? Because you have, from the time your child enters a system like school, all the way to 12th grade, and then who do they become? And what are the dreams and hopes that we hold for them? That's the bigger question, because every parent, I never imagined when I held my child for the first time that, like, oh, I'm going to put you in a system, and then these people are going to come in, and this is going to be this takeover. I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about, I want to imagine all that is possible for this person that I have one opportunity to raise. One of the things that always stood out to me was that love has to be at the core of that. I've noticed that children learn when they are loved. And so I love the Box School for that. And I love Ensoroma for that, because community makes a difference in how a child learns. So all of this stuff, I guess I wasn't plugged into that because I was trying to plug into the day-to-day when we talk about parenting. Even after the pandemic, what does it mean to support our young people in having emotional literacy for themselves, to talk about what they're feeling about what's happening with them, how they came out the other side of this pandemic. Some are still struggling. The rates of, young people taking their own lives is so high, and we're not necessarily getting to the heart of that. So those are the conversations I still continue to have and want to continue to have, because as we talk about the world shifting, there's harm being done, and at every shift there's harm. How do we become the people that our young people will need as they try to navigate this?
One of the things one of the things Grace said a lot is that these systems don't work, and we're the leaders that we're looking for. Government policies made reading illegal for enslaved people. Government policies made segregation legal. Government policies made public school a crisis and opened up the avenue and the door for charter schools. A charter school leader who understands what charter schools have done to public schools. It was also the only way for us to teach our kids what we believe our kids need to know. We know what our kids need to know. The government doesn't necessarily know what our kids need to know, or certain policies don't know that. And people in communities have been deciding what their kids need to know from time immemorial. And so I've always been of the mind that if you're going to be part of a system while resisting the system, you need to do just enough to keep people out your face and over there not looking at you, so you can decide what your kids need to know and then do that. Do what kids need. Do what our communities need. I accept no authority that tells me that I have to tell kids harmful things.
I don't know where to start. There's so much, but I think I'll start by shouting out Magumbo Potter, who's in the back of the room. Who's a graduate of the Sorting Institute, and my sister Jocelyn Shoshana, who is a staff member of Hannah.
All right, bless
Dr. Shoshana, who's a staff member at the Sorting Institute, and say that we were a learning community. And it's hard for me to talk about it in the past tense, actually, because I wear this symbol on my neck every day to remind me of my responsibility to reinvigorate this institution. So, like they say, every goodbye, every shut-eye ain't closed, every goodbye ain't gone, that type of situation. But we were a learning community. One of the things that we learned early on is that you can't really help children transform in isolation. That they have to transform in conjunction with their families and with the community that they're a part of. We took a little bit different approach, and I respect those who have run for office and been on the board of education and who can stomach all that kind of thing. Because certainly we need people in those elected positions. But I take kind of the long view, and I appreciate what Julia said about teaching people of African descent to be illegal. So I kind of look at the long view of public education for Black people in this country. And it's a pretty dismal situation if you look at the long view. I'll say as a student in Detroit Public Schools, from the time I was in 8th grade until I graduated, we were struggling just to get Black history in the schools with minimal success. You know, we had bits and pieces of success here and there. And then as a teacher in Detroit Public Schools for 9 years, I struggled to make sure that the history and culture of people of African descent was fairly represented in the Detroit Public Schools. And we had periods of success and then periods of attack by the state where that success was diminished. So take the view that there's certain things that we have to do for our children regardless of what the state does. And I appreciate what you said, Julia, that I don't proceed with the state requirements as the guidepost for anything that I do. In fact, I start from the assumption that America is a criminal enterprise, it's a settler colony. Let me just pause there and just read the room. Is that all right? Thank you, I appreciate it. I need a little. America's a settler colony. It's essentially illegal, and so I don't feel bound to follow the laws of the United States of America. But if I drive up to a red light, I'm going to stop because I'm going to get a ticket, basically, and also because I'm concerned about public safety. But the state requirements, state laws, is not what's really guiding any of the actions that I take. And so, similarly, we decide what we're going to do, and then we decide how do we survive in this environment doing what we're doing. So one of the things I've seen in public education is that typically in America, it's driven by the needs of the state. When I say the state, I mean not the state of Michigan, but the state, the governmental apparatus of the United States. It's driven by the needs of the state, and it's driven by the needs of the corporate sector. And so basically what happens is they have think tanks that get together and they say, oh, well, in 20 years, we're going to need more people that know how to do A, B, and C, right? To put widgets in holes or whatever. And so then the curriculum shifts to make sure that we're preparing people to put widgets in holes in 20 years. And so the goals of it are not driven by the goals of the people themselves. It's driven by the goals of the very people who are oppressing and creating these huge divisions in access to power and access to wealth in American society. So I don't feel at all guided or beholden to any of that, and there's some work that we have to do regardless of what the state does, regardless of who's in office, there's work that we have to do. So that's kind of how we proceed. Our school in particular was an African-centered school. We were concerned and are concerned in a city that is still close to 80% African-American, that the curriculum in schools from pre-kindergarten to post-doctorate is still Eurocentric primarily. It still reflects the culture and the history of Western Europe and the contributions of people of African descent, indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, Asians, Latinas are minimized. They're the footnote to kind of the main narrative. And so that has a tremendously detrimental effect if you are a person that this society defines as being white. And let me say this, the whole idea of race is a construct, it's not a scientific reality, but still it's something that we can't ignore. And so if you are a person who is defined as white in this society, and you go through schools that give you an overview of the history of people of Western Europe and suggest that the culture of the people of Western Europe is the pinnacle of human development, and that people of African descent never did anything to contribute to human society, then if you're a white person, you'll have a very inflated view of yourself. You will have imbibed the liquor of white supremacy. If you are a black person or another person of color, then you will likely have a diminished view of yourself. You will not be rooted within your own cultural continuum, and you will likely function to the benefit of those whites who are controlling the society. So we were very concerned about making sure that we had a school that undid that damage to us, that internalized self-hatred, by immersing our children in an environment that spoke both in terms of the physical environment, the images they saw around them, but also the content and also how instruction was delivered in a way that, again, both roots them in their own historical continuum, but also, equally as importantly, motivates them to work on behalf of the improvement of their communities, not just for themselves as an individual. When I was in school, the narrative in elementary school that was pushed often was, you need to go to school so you can, get a good job and have a nice house and a nice car, and we take spelling tests every Friday, and I don't know if y'all remember hiding because all your classmates were your competitors, so this idea of competition was instilled very early on. So we were attempting to create an approach to education, a curriculum and environment that promoted cooperation, that promoted a dedication to the collective well-being, that promoted a sense of confidence, that promoted respect. And a lot of times when people hear African-centered, they think, oh, they only teach about black people. Well, not only, we did a lot of that, but also we think it's important that people know about humanity in general, right? And in fact, you really can't understand humanity in general unless you understand the role that African people have played. Because if you go far enough back in the mitochondrial DNA of anybody in this room and anybody on the planet, you're going to get to an African woman. So we can't understand human history and human culture unless we understand the role that Africans played in that. There's a whole lot more I want to say, but I think I'll leave it for that.
Yes, I appreciate that.
So, Baba Malik, what I'm wondering about is what I'm thinking is that I think young people need the foundation that you're talking about, and then they need to be able to understand what the system is and what it's doing and what it's meant to do in terms of the state creating the widget makers. And then understanding the process by which this works, all that Michelle laid out. And I'm wondering I guess I'm curious about what you, like, are you just like, ignore that? Or are you just like, yeah, young people should be taught to like go call up Marshall Bullock and say, this is what we need to learn? Or you're like, forget it.
I'll start by saying that Marshall Bullock is my homeboy. He grew up literally on the same block that I grew up in. So he's my little brother kind of. And so, yeah, Detroit, that's right. No, I would never. So one of the things I've learned as I get older, hopefully I'm becoming more mature, hopefully, and more balanced in the way I see the world. And so I don't see anything in either or terms. You know, that's how the world functions. It's always both and. And so this question arises a lot, particularly in this time period where we have an insane racist maniac in the White House, and evidently, you know, a huge portion of the American populace who supported him. So clearly we can't ignore that. But again, this is a question that plagues our movement in general. How much energy do we put into responding to the state and trying to reform the existing structures so that it may function closer to something that looks like justice? And let me also be clear, I don't think justice is possible within the context of the current American context. So I often talk about relative justice, right? Because justice would kind of look like giving indigenous people the land back and a whole bunch of people getting on boats and airplanes and going to Europe, right? But that's not gonna happen, okay? So what we're talking about really is relative justice. How do we make it look like something closer to justice? And so we certainly can't not respond to the attacks that we're constantly under on the part of the state and on the part of the various institutions that uphold the status quo. But that shouldn't be, I don't think, that should be the main focus of our energy. We have to decide with limited resources and limited energy, how much do we put into building the world that we want to see? And how much do we put into trying to reform the fuck shit? Okay, excuse me if there's children in the room.
They're in the ring.
Okay, great. So that's a question in general, but it's also a question that plagues us in education. Because again, personally, I was involved for decades trying to reform Detroit public schools, fighting in meetings on curriculum. I spoke at one board meeting when Arthur Jefferson was superintendent. Only older people in the room remember that. Yeah. Julian's like, sorry. Thank you. I'm glad. Thank you for remembering who that. But anyway, I was speaking at a board education meeting, and he said, "Oh, looks like you talked yourself into a job." I wasn't looking for a job. I was already working for the school system. But he pulled me out of the classroom and assigned me to develop curriculum down at what used to be called the School Center building before they sold it to Man Anthony Wayne State University. Y'all know about Anthony Wayne, right? And Cass and all the people. That's a whole nother discussion. So, let's see, where was that? Wayne State, help me.
You got a job.
Oh yeah. So Jefferson. So he had me, working with Calvin Blackwell and others developing curriculum, and then we developed these wonderful curriculum guides that were called African American History and Culture Strands. And so we developed these wonderful curriculum strands, and they mysteriously disappeared. And so what I realized is that he kind of pulled me to shut me up, right? He pulled me on the inside, right? But anyway, after decades of all of these efforts to try to reform and seeing minimal success, we have to decide how much energy do we continue to put into trying to reform a cancerous system, and how much energy do we put into building the institutions that we think will develop the type of human beings we're trying to develop?
Good question. Oh, sorry.
Right.
Not that I disagree with anything, but there are no standards for K-8, except I think you have to have a gym. So there's plenty of freedom to cover criteria. I think you can have both. So the state does not impose, except through those standardized tests, which they're meaningless right now because nobody is, the state is not pushing those. They could change politically. And there's a lot of people that could be organized, not just one person, but a group could be organized to stop it, which I think would be a way to protect schools that are doing things differently. There are standards for the high school, but it doesn't say how you teach it. Like, for an example, a social studies thing is teach about the market system. You can teach it any way you want. You know, you don't have to teach it in a Eurocentric way. You can teach it any way you want. So the schools have a lot of say over how they want things to be taught. The standards, you know, if you look at them, they're incredibly broad. And again, nobody is enforcing them right now, so nobody, except for they ask you to take the PSAT and the SAT or whatever it is, to see how people are doing, which is a whole other ball of wax. But there is a lot of, I just want to say, there is a lot of leeway to teach to the standards the way that you want to teach to the standards, and that's up to the local district. And when it's a democratic process, there's a lot of people who want to weigh in. So I think the solution is what you're saying. You go your own way, but if you want to take public money, there are certain rules to the game that you have to live with. If you don't want public money, then you don't have to do any of them. So, what? Yeah, public money through the education system. So if you want to have, because everybody's going to say, all the taxpayers are going to say, you know, I paid all this money, and this businesses pay all this money, and everybody has to have a say, so it has to be a democratic process. It's not just one person gets to have their way. I do know that corporations and the businesses have a lot of, I mean, they've tried to force that down our throats, especially when Snyder was there. They wanted to have curriculum aligned to jobs in kindergarten. But there were a lot of parents and a lot of educators that pushed back and stopped it. But it takes changing policy in order to stop it. And it takes organizing. So that's my 2 cents.
So just really quickly, we're gonna open it up for questions in a little bit. I'm gonna ask one more question, but then we'll open it up to y'all too. And I guess I should also say, you know, as you can tell, we're only scratching the surface
Oh, sure.
of this conversation. And then in 2 weeks, we're gonna have part 2. So this next question will hopefully kind of take us into that. I'm curious, what do you all think students are currently being prepared for? Like, what is the world that kids are learning to be a part of right now? That's a very vague question. And you can take it from the perspective of a school that's doing it well and preparing students for a particular kind of world very well, or you can take a different one. So you gotta think on that. That's fine.
What are schools preparing kids for?
Yes, the curriculums in the schools that you all know the best. What kind of world are they preparing students for?
What should they?
Depends on.
If that's just such a.
Yeah.
What should they prepare them for, or what are they doing now?
What are they doing?
What are they doing now?
Depends on what school.
So you're asking what are the schools preparing them for, or what is the curriculum that the schools are
The
being
curriculum that
handed?
the schools are teaching.
Right.
It depends on the school.
But I guess I will agree with Bob Malik on this. It's not what they're teaching now. There's been an overarching sense of what it means to be in a school system. And I think what really inspired my thinking around educating my own children were two thinkers. One of them was Jean Anion, who talks about the hidden curriculum of schools and how schools are broken down by certain classes. So you have the working class, the middle class, schools that are designed for that, schools that are designed for affluent people, schools that are designed for the executive, right? And when you have working class schools, you have kids who come through these schools and they perpetuate the status quo, which is, your job is to line up, get a bell rung, put your name on the left side of the paper, because if you put it on the wrong side of the paper, you're going to be docked, even though it doesn't matter, right? And so we've been constantly perpetuating that sort of thinking, so we have that. And then the second thinker that really influenced my thought around education was Malcolm X, who said, only a fool would let his enemy educate their children. Right? And so that's where, to me, where we find ourselves, right? When we're talking about money for schools, it really is it's a crap game, because if I want to teach what I want to teach, and I can't get money to do it, then we're gonna have to figure out how to do that. But what I won't continue to do is to be involved in systems that tell my kids that they're not who they are self-determined to be. And so when I talk about my mother, me coming home from school, even as a youngster, me coming home from school saying I want to be white, wasn't me wanting to be white as much as it was, I want to have access to the things that I see as being meaningful. I want to see myself reflected in that. When a child doesn't see themselves reflected in what they're learning, then what are they learning? And so that's not a new thing, like what they're learning now. This has been ongoing. And I think that we need to look at it not history as a linear thing. History is cycles and seasons. So we're seeing the same cycle come back around, where we have, if when we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're seeing that funding just be pulled out. What will that look like in 10 years? We already know what it looks like, because maybe 20 years from now, some Kevin Costner-like person will come out and do a movie called Hidden Figures 2.0, because, because that's what happens to our history.
Kevin Costner like that.
Right? I'm sorry, is that your guy? But so I think we really, really need to think about it. And when I say I'm an educational abolitionist, I'm at the point where I'm starting to think about this whole system has to run. When I say that, I mean it has to crumble. We can't keep repairing a system that continues to disenfranchise us and expect it to do right by us. It has to fall.
I think that curriculums, standards, and curriculums are teaching our kids to perpetuate what is. And it is not teaching our kids to create what could and should be. And I agree that whether we want it to fall or not, it's falling. And if we don't prepare our kids to create what's next, then we have failed them. Because they know it's falling. They just don't know what comes next. And I think of the Bach School as the bridge from what is now to what is next. And to help kids imagine it and practice it and think about it, so that when it falls, they can say, you know what we could do now? We know how to do what could be now. Because if we don't practice, then and then the people with all of those resources are gonna be like, oh, I know what to do, recreate what benefits me again. And we have kids now who will say to us, we don't talk like that at the Bach School when they tell them to shut up. And that is not appropriate, and the kids know it. They expect the same kind of treatment from adults that we are asking them to give others. And they understand, they feel entitled to their voice. That is super annoying, it is super hard, it is not always responsible, it is not always respectful, it is not always right, but they are practicing because they need to feel entitled to their voice. They're gonna need that away from one parent.